Hello chess friends! In 1993, Garry Kasparov was the reigning world champion and was set to defend his title against challenger Nigel from England. After a dispute with FIDE, the International Chess Federation, the players created the Professional Chess Association and organized their own match. Kasparov won with a score of 12.5 against 7.5 points. But FIDE, of course, didn't recognize the match and responded by stripping Kasparov of his official title and organized a separate title match between Karpov and Timman. Today I want to show you game number 7 of the Kasparov-Short-match. So we have Kasparov with the white pieces, Short with the black pieces, and we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez, very often played at the highest level. And after a6, Kasparov goes for the main move, bishop a4, knight f6, Kasparov castles here, and bishop e7, rook e1 defending the pawn on e4, b5, bishop b3, and castles. So there are some moves in this position that are commonly played, like c3, but Kasparov plays the move a4, which is now known as the Kasparov attack. This move threatens to win a pawn by taking on b5, because black can't recapture because of the rook that is undefended on a8, so bishop b7 protects the rook, d3, d6, knight bd2, knight d7, because this knight is coming to c5, wanting to take the bishop on b3. Kasparov creates a retreat square for the bishop on c2 with his move c3, which also hints at pushing the d-pawn to d4 at some point as well. So knight c5, and now Kasparov takes on b5, and here I'm not going to go too deep into it, but taking on b3 is actually not a good move for black because of the so-called Zwischenzug or intermediate move, b takes c6, and so forth. But since that didn't happen in the game, let's not go too deep into that. Instead, after a takes b5, Short recaptures on b5. So now the rook on a1 is hanging, so Kasparov trades it off like this, and the bishop on b3 is attacked, and so is the pawn on d3, both by the knight on c5, so bishop c2, a very logical move. And Kasparov is also hinting now at pushing the d-pawn forward, and Short stops that with the move bishop f6. So instead, Kasparov plays b4, creating this nice boat here. Knight e6, and now knight f1. This is a very typical move in the Spanish. The knight is going to go to e3, and from there it might go either to d5 or f5. So bishop e7, knight e3, and Kasparov actually once said that a knight on f5 is worth a pawn. So Short is not having any of that and plays g6 to stop knight f5. Bishop comes to b3, and this is going to be a very strong bishop in this game, as we'll see on this a2 g8 diagonal, the same diagonal as the black king is on. Bishop g7, and so now how should white proceed from here? Kasparov decides to go for the move h4, hinting at pushing the pawn even one square forward to try to open up the black king, get to the black king basically. Black could play h5 here, but he decided he didn't want to do that because that would leave the g5 square quite weak. So instead he goes bishop c8, trying to get the bishop to the defense. Here Kasparov just simply sacrifices the pawn with h5. If you take this pawn, you could take this pawn, but it's not very good, because after g3, let's say bishop h6, king g2, the white rook here is going to come to h1, this knight is going to come to h4, and then the queen is just going to come and take the pawn, and this knight here could even go to f5, and it's just not great for black, to say the least. So Short just doesn't take on h5. Instead he plays king h8. It does give him the option to put the rook on g8 as a defense mechanism later on. So now Kasparov plays knight d5, and this is where Short decides to close the position with g5, which has some merits. It gives the attacker fewer ways to break through, but it does create a huge weakness on f5. So Kasparov immediately plays knight e3, just saying, now you gave me the f5 square, and that's where my knight's gonna go. Short plays knight f4, threatening the pawn on h5, but basically Kasparov doesn't care about this pawn. He's just happy to lose that pawn and open up the h file for his attacking pieces. So he just plays g3, allows the pawn to be taken, and here comes the knight to f5. As mentioned earlier, a knight on f5 is a big problem for black, so allowing it to just stay there for a long time is not very pleasant for black. So Short decides to trade it off like this. Here the pawn on g5 is threatened, and if you try to defend it with a move like h6, then white has a very strong continuation with the move knight takes g5. It's a discovered attack on the knight on h5 by the queen on d1. So for example, if black were to take this, then queen takes, king g8, and bishop g5 is just simply winning for white, because you can't even put the pawn on f6 because of the bishop on b3 that's pinning it. So in this position here, after e takes f5, takes the bishop on f5, Short plays the move instead queen d7, allowing the pawn on g5 to be taken. And here he does play h6, and I want to show you a couple of other moves. If he, which is a mistake by the way, he should have played actually knight f6, where white is still better. White can, for example, always play king g2 and rook h1, and that rook will be quite strong on the half-open h file. If he, in this position, were to play queen takes f5, then bishop d5 would follow, and this is a winning position for white. The knight on c6 is attacked, must move somewhere, and then white can just continue his plan of king g2 and rook h1, and the attack is just too strong because also the bishop is coming to e4. So just to draw some lines, you got the king coming to g2, then the rook coming to h1, and bishop coming to e4, and all of this just translates to a winning position basically for white. So after the move bishop takes g5, Short should have played knight f6, but he played the move h6, which is a losing move. Actually, here, according to modern day computers, Kasparov missed the strongest move. He played knight h4, but by far the strongest move, a winning move, is bishop takes h6. The point being, after bishop takes h6, now another sledgehammer with knight takes e5. Basically, we've got the discovered attack on the knight on h5 here, simultaneously attacking the queen on d7. So after takes, here, for example, if you play king h7, then there is the move f6, and let's say, for example, rook g8, then d4, and the bishop is coming to c2. So this bishop has been quite strong in this game, and this is a winning position for white as well. So this was after queen takes h5. If you play king h7, if you play queen d6, then bishop takes f7, queen f6, bishop d5. Here, for example, if you play knight e7, then there is this great move rook takes e5. The point being that if you take this with a queen, then queen takes h6 is checkmate. So this is what Kasparov should have done here. So he missed this actually, but he still plays a strong move, being the strongest player in the world and all. So he plays knight h4 here. The point being that once again it's a discovered attack on the knight on h5. For example, if you take this, then there is queen takes h5 check, king g8, and now the rather annoying move for black, f6. For example, if you, let's say you take this, then queen g5 and then mate on g7, or if you take this, then there is queen g6 check. Notice the bishop on b3 pinning the pawn on f7, and after bishop g7 there is knight f5, and now you're going to have to give your queen for the knight on f5. So another winning position for white here. We go back here to knight h4. This was after knight h4. If you take the bishop on g5, then this is how black goes down in flames. So instead, Short played the move knight f6. Kasparov took this, bishop took, and queen h5, threatening the pawn on h6, obviously. So king h7. Here actually, again, the computer preferred the move knight f3 with a continuation knight e7, attacking the pawn on f5, g4, king g7, rook e3. But Kasparov played another move. He played knight to g2, just rerouting the knight a little bit. The knight is going to come to e3, and from there it has g4 and d5 to choose from. Knight e7. This move not only attacks the pawn on f5, but also this knight is headed for g8, where it defends the pawn on h6. So after knight e7, Kasparov plays knight e3 to defend his pawn, and then knight comes to g8, just anticipating attacks on the h6 pawn. And this is where Kasparov sacrifices a pawn again with the move d4, takes, and here Short took the pawn, which gave him a lost position. He should have played actually bishop g5, and the computer is actually just quite happy with black's position here. But after Short's mistake of accepting this gift on d4, he is lost. I'm going to show you how Kasparov won this with the move knight g4, and there are some threats here. For example, if you play bishop f6, there is this move queen takes h6 check, which is quite nice. And after knight takes, then there is this fork here, winning the queen, and white is winning here, of course. Also, in this position, if you play a move like, let's say, f6, because after all, white's plan was to push his pawn to f6 and then put the bishop on c2, which was quite dangerous. Now there is the move knight takes h6, and if you recapture that, then queen g6, only move king h8, and then of course he takes, and now your only move is to block. But then of course queen takes f8 check and checkmate like this. So that's no good for black either. So basically the threat here was to push the f pawn to f6 and then play bishop c2 check with devastating effects. That's why I was showing you earlier the move bishop f6 to try desperately to block the white pawn on f5 from advancing. But here this very nice move queen takes h6. Also we looked at f6 and then knight takes h6 and so forth. So he tried king g7, but that also didn't work after knight takes h6. And if you take that, then there is a move queen g5 check, king h7, and here bishop c2 with the threat to play f6, of course. And if you play f6, then there is again this annoying check here and this one here, and the bishop comes back here. This bishop has been quite troublesome for black, to say the least. And if you play, for example, d5 here, then there is bishop takes d5, takes, check, and then rook e7, and this is winning. There are some mate threats that are kind of hard to stop, and bishop takes f2 doesn't work. It's a nice try to get a perpetual, but it actually doesn't work, without going too deep into that. So, where were we? We had, after king g7, we had this nice move, knight takes h6, and we looked at why taking on h6 didn't work after queen g5 and so forth. Actually, we hadn't finished looking at that, so let's continue with bishop c2. We only looked at here f6 and queen g6 and so forth, but actually I wanted to show you also bishop f6 to desperately block the f5 pawn from advancing. Then there is queen takes, let's say rook e8, because there are some really nice lines here, especially this one, rook e6, threatening queen takes h6. And maybe you're wondering why not just take this rook. It's because there is a discovered check here from the bishop, once again this bishop, and then we take the queen, of course, after the king moves out of the check. So here we have other tries like knight g8, and white can just move his queen, and you just can't take this rook. No matter which way you take this rook, even though you have 3 pieces to take it with, you always lose the queen. So f6 here, then comes this check again, and rook takes e8, obviously a completely winning position. So now that we've looked at all of that, we can go back to this position after king g7, where Kasparov took. Short didn't take the knight, instead he played bishop f6 here. But unfortunately for Short, Kasparov has yet another blow in this position. Once again, the bishop comes storming and goes to f7, and here actually Short resigned. So I'm going to show you why he resigned. The threats are just too many. For example, queen g6 here, but also there's just nothing to do for black here. If you take, for example, here, then there is queen g6, check, king h8 only move, and queen takes h6, checkmate. And if you take the bishop, then there is also a forced mate after queen g6, and king h8 or king f8, doesn't matter, queen takes g8 is checkmate in both cases. So, once again, a great attacking game by Garry Kasparov. I thank you very much for watching today, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care, bye bye.